The morning it began, the city smelled of rain and warm metal. Traffic thrummed somewhere beyond the hedges, and the estate's gates opened with a soft hydraulic sigh. May had dust on her palms and a small paper cup of tea in her other hand when she heard a whisper that landed like a stone. It wasn't meant for her, but it changed everything. She stood for a moment with her broom forgotten against the marble, listening to two guards joking quietly by the vehicle bay. Their words were casual, practiced, nothing anyone would notice. But to her, raised on a farm where tones and half words could warn of storms, it sounded urgent, sharp-edged. She felt something cold slide down her spine. She had to act. She didn't know why, only that the air around her had filled with a danger she could not ignore. Daniel Hart was the kind of man who had learned to trust systems, checklists, contracts, secure transfers, guards with tidy haircuts. He had friends in private rooms and enemies in quiet boardrooms. His fortune had been built on prediction, seeing patterns other people missed, and on a refusal to be surprised. That morning he moved like a man who had already won his day, briefcase in hand, tie knot perfect, phone on buzz. When May stepped into his study and said, with a voice small as a child's, "Sir, please do not get into the car," he looked at her as if she had said something impossible. Then he noticed the tremble at the edge of her words, the way her fingers clutched the cup so tight the paper crumpled. He asked her to repeat it. She told him exactly what she had heard in the garage. She did not embellish. She did not ask for thanks. At first it felt absurd to all of them. The estate's senior security chief, a veteran who had worked for the company for years, scoffed when Daniel brought him May's warning. "Cleaning staff hear everything. It's called listening," he said. But Daniel watched May's face closely. She was not one to seek attention. She had been in Shanghai less than a year. A quiet presence who kept to the back hallways. There was a clarity to her fear that reached him. He asked for a discreet sweep, requested that his international security team confirm identities, and insisted that the car be checked before he left. The checks returned contradictions, fake badges, mismatched paperwork. Two guards who had been on the shift that morning were not who they claimed to be. That was the first real ripple. When the car was opened, a tight, headed sensation rose in the pit of Daniel's stomach. The bomb technicians who came, careful, methodical people with even calmer faces, found a device the size and shape of a briefcase battery. It had been fitted into a cavity under the passenger seat, rigged with a timing mechanism and a pressure trigger. If Daniel had sat down and started the engine, he would have moved the conductor that completed the circuit. Someone had expected him to do exactly that. The story spread quickly, and those with cameras and pens tried to find fortune in the narrative, a maid who saved a millionaire. But the headlines missed what mattered to May. She did not want fame. She wanted safety for the people she loved and the small dignity of a life she could finally call her own. The arrests were messy and uncertain. The two imposter guards were apprehended by a special unit and, under interrogation, named a broker, a shadowy figure who had previously been a partner of Daniel's in an ill-fated overseas venture. The man had lost money and status, and where once he had worked with Daniel to create systems that read markets, he had turned to selling secrets to the highest bidder. When his voice was heard on the security tapes, there was no regret in it, only a cold arithmetic. "There will always be buyers for certainty," he said. The scale of the conspiracy widened. Those implicated were not all villains cast in simple black. Many were people swallowed by greed and fear in equal measure, individuals who thought less of lives than of ledgers. Daniel sought May out after the arrests. There was a stiffness in his gratitude that he could not hide. Rich men often had trouble accepting gifts they could not quantify. May had asked for nothing. He offered her money, a safe place to live, a quiet job with steady hours. She declined at first. Her heart had been held together with hope and small, stubborn dreams. A promise to send her younger brother to school in their home province, a plan to learn further so she might one day stand up for people like herself. Daniel listened, then wrote a different offer: an education fund, legal assistance to help her brother, and a position of apprenticeship where she could learn administration and the basics of governance. He wanted to hire her because she had saved him. Yes, but also because she had seen something others had missed. He believed that kind of attentiveness could be taught into leadership. Time rearranged itself after that. May's life shifted from the rhythms of dusting and laundry to long, cool afternoons poring over case files with a retired lawyer who volunteered at the foundation Daniel established. She learned to read contracts, to ask the right questions, and to see how thin threads of complicity could wrap around whole institutions. Daniel, who had once relied on algorithms to decide the future, found himself returning to the human element: empathy, trust, the messy business of listening. He watched May thrive in the slow, steady way of people who had been given a chance and refused to waste it. She passed exams, argued with prosecutors, and slowly became the person other employees came to when something felt off. There were darker returns. The broker who had orchestrated the assassination attempt was only a piece of a larger web. Investigations uncovered offshore accounts, messages encrypted through layers of innocuous, seeming apps, and alliances that stretched into boardrooms across continents. There were threats against witnesses. There were late-night calls of static in a car that followed Mai home one rainy night. Daniel placed extra security around her, drivers' alarms, men and women who meant to keep her safe. But Mai learned the most useful protection was not steel or cameras, but a network of people who cared enough to act. Her own voice, once small in the echo of a grand house, had become a signal. She began to call others who had seen things and asked them to speak. She discovered a municipal clerk who had quietly altered shipping manifests for cash, a courier who had exchanged envelopes in a subway station, and a lonely accountant who finally admitted numbers had been manipulated. Years later, they stood in the same study where a paper cup had once crumpled in Mai's hand. Daniel's hair was softer at the temples. The city outside no longer felt like a distant constellation, but like a place he belonged to. May had graduated from law school with a scholarship established in her name and led a nonprofit that helped marginalized workers understand their rights. The cases she'd taken had started as small injustices, unpaid wages, falsified documents, and grown into a series of victories that tightened the net around those who would exploit invisibility. People who were once ignored began to insist on being seen. On the anniversary of the day that began it all, Daniel sat quietly and said, "You did something brave that morning when you spoke. You had no obligation, no witness, only a whisper and your courage." May smiled, thinking of the morning light, of the way her alarm had seemed louder than life had any right to be. "I did what anyone would do," she said softly. "I listened, and I learned that the world will sometimes try to teach us that the things we can't measure aren't worth saving. That's not true. Not anymore." The message they left the people who watched their story unfold was both simple and stubbornly difficult. The world is built by ordinary acts, by people who choose, in the smallest moments, to say the thing that matters. A whisper can be the hinge on which a life turns. To be invisible is not a destiny. It is a condition that can be changed with attention, solidarity, and refusal to look away. The cameras faded, the tabloids moved on, and other news took its predictable place. But the ripples remained. The guards were prosecuted. Policies at countless estates were rewritten to require better vetting and oversight. Daniel rebuilt some of what had almost been lost. May's brother completed his schooling and later opened a small clinic in their hometown, where a woman who once swept floors became the mentor to children who planted trees. The two of them, one saved, one the savior, kept a quiet friendship that had nothing to do with payback and everything to do with recognition that what keeps us safe is not only money or cameras, but the willingness of another human to speak up. If there is a single take away that lingers, it is this: courage is not always loud. It often comes wrapped in hesitation, in hands that have known hard work, and in voices that tremble at the edges. But when someone listens to that trembling and acts, lives can change. Don't dismiss small warnings. Don't assume someone else will step forward. The whisper you ignore might just be the one that would have saved everything.